In this section, we're going to look at PSM and with an introduction to what is PSM, how it has evolved, and how it all fits together with the various frameworks out there. When we look at what is PSM, there are a few things we've got to go through. Some terminology, global trends, the development, the various models, drivers, etc. You can see here the list of things that we're going to go through in this presentation. When we look at terminology, let's look at setting the baseline. Risk is a combination of what can go wrong, how bad could it be, and how often might it happen. When we look at risk-based, it depicts one or more risk attributes of a process, activity, or facility. Considering any one of the three risk questions above can be viewed as a risk-based activity. For simplicity, rather than use a term such as hazard-based, consequence-based, or frequency-based, the single term risk-based is used to mean any one or a combination of these terms. Global trends, oil and gas specific, but generally you can say it's the same for other sectors. We know that in terms of occupational safety performance for various oil and gas companies, BP for example, which was my previous employer, we can see that over the years from 1992 to 2010, there has been a reduction in the reportable incidents per productivity or man-hours worked. Now, global trends in terms of major incidents, again looking at it from 1974 to 2010, some of these are very, very familiar. They had some very high profile exposure, especially in the news. For example, Texas refinery and Flixborough was one that was very well covered. So you can see that from a global trends, we've got incidents that have happened for many, many years. Now, not to dwell too long on this particular slide, but as you can see in terms of global trends, the damage in terms of dollars per 1,000 barrels refinery, and I said this was an oil and gas input, you can see it has increased over the years from 1964 to 2000. The message there is it's getting costly. So process safety versus occupational safety. What exactly is it? Why is process safety different from occupational safety? Well, process safety is not normal. Most people, not all, lack specific experience, and please don't toast me for this, that's just a general opinion. More robust analyses are required to identify the hazards being something that can cause harm. And unacceptable consequences need more reliable controls. But the most important message here is that process safety related incidents have far-reaching, devastating impacts. In the previous slide you saw some of the impacts relative to loss of life, Texas refinery, Flixborough, etc. They can be significantly damaging to an organization. Let's look at the evolution of process safety strategies. You can see the slides here go in terms of standard-based strategy, compliance, continuous improvement, and risk-based strategy, which is what we're looking at specifically. Now, in the standards-based strategy, what normally happens and what should I do? You look at ANSI, API, ASME, NFPA, etc. Apologies for the acronyms, but I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. In compliance-based strategy, what do I have to do? Well, you look at OSHA for process safety management, EPA, and Surveyso 3, etc. These are very regulatory driven. Continuous improvement based strategy are how can I improve based upon my experience. Again, many of you will be familiar with the management systems associated with health, safety and environment, specifically OSHA 18001, ISO 14001, etc. And risk-based strategy. How can I improve risk management? Well, risk-based, lagging, leading indicators to improve. Now, a slide on PSM development. In 1992, the final OSHA PSM standard was issued. In 1989, CCPS published their original PSM elements, followed by, in 2007, CCPS publishing the guidelines for risk-based process safety. And there are two specific documents, the 2007 CCPS published guidance for effective pre-startup safety reviews and CCPS published guidelines for risk-based process safety. Let's not worry too much about the documents here. We'll be covering all of these and the various elements bit by bit, and also, more importantly, looking at the various components in it, metrics, etc. We must also mention that in 2010, the Energy Institute published the framework for high-level process safety management. Let's now look at PSM models. We mentioned OSHA and we mentioned CCPS. OSHA has 14 elements stroke standards, and the CCPS risk-based process safety has 20 elements. Fundamentally, they follow this principle of hazard identification, analyzing risks, measuring success, mitigation and management programs on hazards, and understanding process safety hazards. Now, let's look at PSM drivers. The important issues to address in a PSM framework are the purpose and scope. Is it clearly defined? Are personnel roles and the responsibilities established? What about tasks and procedures? Are they mapped out? And is the necessary input information available? Are we aware of the anticipated results and work products? Do we know what we're getting into here? And do personnel have appropriate qualifications and training to follow through on the PSM aspirations and framework? Now, does the organization also have the necessary resources and tools? Has there been alignment on metrics for continuous improvement? And what about management review? Is there a process and a schedule defined? And finally, let's not forget auditing. Is the auditing plan in place and are resources available? These are just examples. I'm sure there are more, but there are main examples for the important issues to address in a PSM framework. What about the OSHA PSM model? Here's an overview on that. Mentioned earlier, there are 14 key elements or standards. Not to dwell too long on this, but I'm listing here the various bits of the OSHA PSM framework. There are 14. And you can see it goes from the various points from employee participation through to training, contractors, PSSR is pre-startup safety review, management of change, and emergency response plans. CCPS risk-based process safety. There are 4 pieces essentially. Commit to process safety culture, which really has 5 elements. Understanding hazards and risks, 2 key elements. Managing risks, and it goes on to finally learn from experience. There are 20 elements, as mentioned, that all play a pivotal role in the risk-based process safety framework. The next slide is a little bit busy, and I apologize in advance for that, but this is just to give you a quick overview on a comparison, if you like, between the various models. Here is the risk-based process safety. This is the original CCPS PSM element and the OSHA framework. You can see they all slot in nicely in terms of bits to do within those 4 key areas that I mentioned earlier. From experience, PSM benefits. What does it do in terms of risk reduction? Years 1 to 5, typically I've seen a reduction of 40%. Years 6 to 10 can go up to 80%. This results in cost of incidents reduced and bad publicity being eliminated. So, risk-based process safety. Some of the challenges are, when you're trying to implement it in your organization, developing an adequately detailed and accurate understanding of risk. Getting over the initial difficulty and getting the right metrics in place. As I mentioned, this can get very messy. It can be very confusing, and it can also be a noose around the organization's neck. Acquiring the discipline required to maintain these performance metrics. It's all about continuity and continuous improvement. As I said, progress can only be made if progress is measured. And developing trust and integrity. Overcoming resistance to change. This goes to culture, which is a very, very key part. Having the right culture in place and the workforce involvement goes a long way in terms of getting your PSM successfully implemented and really delivering. Earlier we talked about the 4 key parts of the CCPS framework: commit to process safety, understanding hazards and evaluating risks, managing the risks, and learning from experience. Then explained that there are various elements in these key pieces of the pillar. There are 5 elements in this particular pillar: commit to process safety, going to 9 in the managing of risks. One would say this is the most demanding part, but also I would say everything is demanding. It's all relative within your organization. And learning from experience is important. It forms a part of the continuous improvement loop. And finally, the house picture. Many of you will be familiar with this house picture in terms of how the pillars are depicted forming this house diagram. You can see that at the bottom line are the 4 pillars, from commit to process safety through to learn from experience, and how these vertical pillars are representing the elements. So the bottom line is the foundation, and the pillars are there putting the roof on place, which is part of your process safety management.